Imagine scrolling through your phone on a quiet Sunday evening. You open an app, and within seconds, you are flooded with images of 23-year-olds showing off their minimalist luxury apartments, exotic sports cars, and brokerage accounts flashing casual seven-figure balances. They make it look effortless, almost accidental, as if accumulating millions is just something that happens to you if you wake up early enough and drink the right kind of coffee. Then you close the app, look around your own room, and a quiet, heavy anxiety starts to settle in. You start doing the mental math of your own life. You look at your current age, your current savings, and you think, I must be missing something. Everyone else is winning the race, and I haven't even found the starting line. But what if the map you've been given is completely fake? Most of what we are told about wealth accumulation is a distorted, hyper-optimized illusion designed to grab your attention, spark jealousy, and make you feel inadequate. The reality of how people actually build wealth is far less glamorous, but infinitely more encouraging. There is an actual statistical timeline to when everyday people hit monumental financial milestones, like $100,000, $500,000, and $1 million. And the truth behind these ages explains why your financial journey probably feels agonizingly slow right now, and exactly when that is going to change. Let's start with the first major milestone that feels like trying to climb a vertical cliff with nothing but your bare hands: $100,000. If you look at the broad statistical data for the general population, the median net worth for households doesn't cross the $100,000 mark until people are well into their late 30s or early 40s. For dedicated savers and people actively investing for their future, that timeline moves up, usually landing somewhere between the ages of 30 and 35. But why does this first milestone take so long? Why does it feel like you're pouring your sweat, tears, and entire lifestyle into a savings account only for the balance to creep up like molasses? The reason is a brutal mathematical reality. When you are saving your first $100,000, your money is doing almost none of the heavy lifting. You are doing 99% of the work. If you invest $10,000 and it grows by a fantastic 10% in a year, you've made $1,000. That's nice, but it isn't life-changing. It doesn't pay for a major life transition, and it certainly doesn't allow you to relax. To get that balance up to six figures, you have to manually sacrifice. You have to say no to dinners out, drive the older car with the dent in the bumper, and manually funnel your hard-earned paycheck into an account month after month. This is what financial experts call the friction phase. It requires pure, unadulterated willpower. Psychologically, this is the hardest period of your financial life because you're putting in maximum effort for what feels like minimal reward. You look at your balance of $40,000 and think, at this rate, it will take me decades just to get anywhere meaningful. But a fascinating psychological shift happens the moment you cross that $100,000 threshold, usually in your early to mid-30s. For the first time, you have a proof of concept. Up until this point, saving money felt like a theoretical exercise, an act of blind faith. But seeing six figures changes your internal identity. You stop viewing yourself as someone who is just trying to survive the month, and you start viewing yourself as an investor. The noise of everyday financial panic starts to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. You realize that you aren't just building a safety net, you are building an engine. And that brings us to the second milestone, which completely flips the rules of the game: $500,000. When do most people actually hit $500,000? Statistically, for the average household, this milestone isn't achieved until their late 60s. But for disciplined, intentional wealth builders, it typically happens between the ages of 40 and 45. Now look closely at the math here, because this is where the conventional way of thinking falls apart. It might take a dedicated saver 10 to 12 years of intense discipline to go from $0 to $100,000. But to go from $100,000 to $500,000, which is 4 times as much money, takes roughly the exact same amount of time, and sometimes even less. How is that possible? It's because you have quietly transitioned out of the friction phase and into the acceleration phase. At $500,000, the primary driver of your wealth is no longer your paycheck, it's compounding energy. Think about the psychology of this shift. When you have $500,000 invested, a standard 7% return in the stock market generates $35,000 in a single year. That is likely more than you were able to save manually over an entire 5-year period when you first started out. Suddenly, your money is working a full-time job alongside you, earning its own income while you sleep. The psychological transformation at this age is profound. When you hit $500,000 in your early or mid-40s, your relationship with your career fundamentally changes. You no longer operate from a place of absolute dependence or desperation. If your boss becomes toxic, or if your company goes through a chaotic restructuring, you don't experience the soul-crushing panic that a 25-year-old living paycheck to paycheck experiences. You possess what financial writers call partial financial freedom. You aren't ready to retire to a tropical island yet, but you have enough leverage to say no to bad deals, request flexible working hours, or pivot to a completely different career path that brings you genuine fulfillment. The mental weight of survival is entirely gone, replaced by the luxury of choice. Which leads us to the ultimate benchmark, the milestone that dominates every headline and social media thumbnail, the $1 million mark. If you believe the internet, you are a failure if you haven't hit $1 million by your 26th birthday. But what does the real-world data say? The average age of a first-time self-made millionaire is 57 years old. Even for highly disciplined long-term index fund investors who started early in their careers, the crossover point typically occurs between the ages of 48 and 53. $1 million is almost never the result of a viral trend, a lucky lottery ticket, or a speculative gamble. It is the result of 3 decades of quiet, boring, completely unglamorous choices. It is the product of a person who decided to consistently live below their means in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, allowing the relentless mathematics of compound interest to do what it does best. When you cross that $1 million threshold in your late stabilization years, the psychological shift is less about wild celebration and more about a deep, resonant sense of peace. Most everyday millionaires don't celebrate by buying a gold watch or a neon supercar. In fact, studies show that their daily spending habits barely change at all. They still use coupons, they still drive practical vehicles, and they still value utility over luxury. Because the true value of $1 million isn't what it allows you to buy, it's what it allows you to protect. It represents the absolute sovereignty over your time. When you reach this milestone in your 50s, you realize that wealth isn't about looking rich to strangers you don't even like. Wealth is the ability to wake up in the morning and decide exactly how you want to spend your day. It's the freedom to retire early if your health demands it, to spend a year traveling with your family, or to fund a passion project without checking your bank account balance first. When you look at this entire timeline from 100,000 to 1 million, a beautiful pattern emerges. Wealth accumulation is not a straight line, it is a hockey stick. The beginning is flat, heavy, and exhausting. The middle begins to curve upward, and the end shoots straight into the sky. The biggest mistake people make is looking at someone who is further along the curve and comparing their own beginning to that person's middle or end. If you were 28 or 35 and your net worth feels small, you aren't failing. You are simply doing the heavy lifting required to get the wheel turning. The secret isn't to find an impossible shortcut or to feel ashamed that you haven't hit a massive number by an arbitrary age. The secret is to understand the math, trust the timeline, and stay in the game long enough to let the acceleration take over. The timeline of wealth isn't about speed, it's about endurance, perspective, and the quiet realization that the best financial milestones are the ones that give you back your life.